Nation stood in stunned disbelief as the youngest member of the royal family, the fourth in line to the British throne, stunned the world with a shocking announcement. Prince Louis, long known for his boisterous energy and mischievous antics, had become the center of a deeply personal crisis that shook the very core of the monarchy. It wasn't the King or the Princess of Wales who dominated the headlines this time, but Louis himself, a child whose vibrant presence had so often lightened the royal family's heavy crown. Barely a moment had passed since the country had begun to recover from a series of health scares that had plagued the royal family, health battles that had tested the monarchy's strength in ways few could have anticipated. The news of the King's health complications had sent shockwaves throughout the nation, while the Princess of Wales's lengthy recovery had been a topic of great concern and sympathy. Yet just as the public began to breathe a sigh of relief, another crisis emerged from the palace. And this time it wasn't an issue of regal responsibilities or public duties. It was a family matter, an issue that threatened the very innocence and well-being of the youngest royal. The new development that surfaced from Buckingham Palace wasn't just surprising, it was disastrous. The kind of news that would alter the trajectory of an entire young life. The public's perception of Prince Louis, once a symbol of royal joy and youthful energy, was irrevocably changed by what was revealed in the palace's announcement. No longer just the carefree child who delighted crowds with his innocent pranks on the palace balcony, Louis had become the subject of a deeply emotional and personal crisis, one that would forever alter the way the world viewed him. The vibrant, cheeky little boy who once charmed the nation with his infectious laughter and uncontainable energy now stood at the heart of an unfolding tragedy. As the world held its breath, an unsettling silence fell over the nation, as if everyone knew that something was terribly wrong, but no one quite understood how or why it had happened. The news flashed across all major networks, capturing the attention of every home and every screen. Royal reporters, their voices trembling with disbelief, hurried to the gates of Buckingham Palace, desperate to confirm the unthinkable. This wasn't another royal update or a formal statement from the palace. This was something more intimate, something far more human. The palace, known for its composed and reserved tone, had chosen to speak of a crisis that was deeply personal, affecting not just the royal family, but the very future of the monarchy itself. The words on the screen were laden with emotion that no one could have anticipated from the usually reserved and stoic institution. The announcement didn't focus on titles or duties, it focused on the human side of the royal family, the vulnerable, hurting side that the public rarely gets to see. It was about Louis, the youngest prince who had so often been the source of joy and laughter within the royal household. It was about a child who in his innocence had become the emotional heart of the family. But now that heart was breaking, and the palace could no longer hide it. The message, carefully crafted yet filled with raw emotion, conveyed both strength and sorrow in equal measure, a delicate balance that spoke volumes about the gravity of the situation. The royal family was hurting, and they were asking the world to bear witness to it, to acknowledge the pain of their youngest member. Speculation began almost immediately. What had happened to the spirited boy that the public adored? How could things have spiraled so quickly? How could a child so full of life, so full of joy, suddenly find himself in the midst of such an intense personal struggle? The public, who had followed Louis's every move with fascination and affection, was left grappling with these questions. How had this crisis emerged from within the walls of Buckingham Palace, so suddenly, so unexpectedly? As whispers of emotional and psychological turmoil spread, it became clear that the royal family's internal strife, compounded by the King's health struggles and the Princess of Wales's long recovery, had taken a toll on their youngest. Louis, it seemed, had not been immune to the stress that had affected the entire family. In fact, insiders revealed that it was the youngest prince who had suffered the most, his tender heart unable to handle the pressure of witnessing his family's pain. While the world had been focused on the King's health and the public's sympathy for Catherine's recovery, Louis had been quietly struggling with the weight of it all. The family had tried to shield him, but the cracks had begun to show in ways that no one had expected. The boy who once filled the palace halls with laughter was now retreating into himself, his energy sapped by the emotional turmoil that swirled around. The announcement, in essence, was one of the most candid admissions from Buckingham Palace in recent history. The royal family had long prided itself on its ability to maintain a sense of composure, to weather storms without letting the public see the cracks in their facade. But this time, the palace had revealed something much more vulnerable, much more human. It was an admission that, despite all the resources and support available to them, the royal family was just as susceptible to emotional pain and personal struggle as any other family. The public's reaction was swift and intense. People who had once seen the royal family as an untouchable symbol of power and stability were now confronted with a stark reminder of the fragility of human emotion. The royal family, once a perfect image of grace and poise, had now become a family in crisis, struggling to maintain their balance in the face of overwhelming pressure. The truth, no matter how painful, had been exposed, and the world was forced to confront the reality of what was happening within the palace walls. This wasn't just a story about the royal family, it was a story about family, about loss, about the toll that life's challenges can take on even the most privileged among us. And as the world watched, they couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, the heartbreaking reality that despite the trappings of power and prestige, no family is immune to the pain of emotional hardship. The palace had opened a door that had long been closed, revealing a side of the royal family that few had ever seen. And in doing so, they had forced the world to confront the true cost of living in the public eye, the personal sacrifices that come with being a member of one of the most famous families in the world. It was a revelation that would resonate long after the headlines faded, a stark reminder that no matter how far removed one may be from the ordinary, the struggles of the heart are universal. For once, the monarchy's carefully constructed image seemed irrelevant. The facade of perfect composure and grace crumbled in the face of a more profound truth. What mattered now was not the polished appearance of royal duty, but the raw, unfiltered reality of a family in turmoil. As the news spread like wildfire, televisions flickered across homes, holding the attention of a captivated public. Phones buzzed incessantly, each one carrying messages of disbelief, concern, and sympathy. Even those who had never paid much attention to royal matters found themselves united in their sorrow for Louie, the once energetic young prince who had brightened the nation's heart with his innocent pranks on the palace balcony. The very same child who had once been the source of joy and laughter now found himself at the epicenter of an overwhelming tragedy. Behind the grandiose walls of Buckingham Palace, the aftershocks of this revelation reverberated throughout the royal household. Kensington Palace, usually a place of measured calm, was now abuzz with whispered conversations and secretive actions. Representatives began making discreet calls to Louis's school, instructing staff to delay any planned visits, their voices laced with urgency and concern. The royal family, once seen as a symbol of indomitable strength, was no longer just battling public perception. They were fighting an invisible storm, one that threatened to engulf their youngest member in a torrent of emotions and uncertainties. The crisis had long been brewing, but now it had been thrust into the public eye, impossible to ignore. It became painfully clear that the weight of the previous year's relentless turmoil, of health scares, emotional exhaustion, and unrelenting pressure had taken its toll on Louis. What had been a private family struggle was now exposed to the world. A family's silent grief, once carefully hidden behind palace walls, was no longer a secret. It was a truth that could no longer be buried beneath royal duty and public appearances. For Prince William, the father who had always been seen as a pillar of royal duty and composed authority, this moment of exposure was uncharacteristically vulnerable. The man who had always been seen as the heir apparent, calm and collected under any circumstances, now stood before the world as a father, heartbroken and desperate to protect his son. With cameras flashing and the entire globe focused on him, Prince William made a heart-wrenching confession. There was no podium, no prepared statement, just a father facing the weight of his son's suffering and the pain that came with it. The royal composure so often practiced and perfected was nowhere to be found. This wasn't a speech or a royal address. This was a moment of raw emotion, a father laying bare his soul in front of the world. His voice quivered as he spoke, the words coming from a place of deep anguish. He paused for a long moment, his shoulders heavy with the burden of the truth he was about to reveal. It was as if he needed to summon every ounce of strength he had left to speak the words that would tear through the heart of the nation. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion, barely able to hold itself together. Louis has been struggling, he said, his words hanging in the air as though the very sound of them shattered something within him. The situation, the toll that the family's endless trials had taken on their youngest, was too much for him to bear. This was no longer about royal duties or public appearances. This was a father's heartbreak, a child's silent suffering, and the weight of a family's pain. Prince William continued, detailing the toll the recent months had taken on their home. He spoke of the sleepless nights when Louis would quietly slip into their bedroom, his wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. He described how the once energetic child, so full of life and laughter, had gradually withdrawn, retreating into himself. The carefree moments of joy had become rare, fading into melancholy. Louis, who had once dashed through the palace halls with boundless energy, was now holed up in his room, isolated and despondent. The child who had once been the heartbeat of the royal household now found himself lost in a world of confusion, unable to cope with the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken him. The stress, compounded by the king's health crisis and Catherine's prolonged illness, had taken a toll on everyone, but it was Louis who had borne the heaviest burden. Prince William, his face etched with regret, admitted that he hadn't seen the signs until it was too late. The weight of his royal duties, of constantly managing crises and fulfilling obligations, had overshadowed his ability to see the quiet suffering of his son. He confessed that in his efforts to protect the monarchy and his family, he had failed to notice the small, silent signs of Louis's pain. The guilt was overwhelming. "I didn't see what was slipping between my fingers," William continued, his voice cracking under the weight of his admission. "I was trying to hold the crown and my family at the same time." The guilt of not being present for his son, of not recognizing the signs of distress, was more painful than any public scandal. It wasn't the weight of the crown that had broken him. It was the realization that in his pursuit of royal duty, he had failed as a father. The confession left the nation reeling. The prince, who had long been regarded as a symbol of royal grace and poise, was now revealing the cracks in the armor. The perfect image of royal duty had given way to painful, unfiltered truth. The monarchy, for all its grandeur, was still vulnerable to the emotional trials that every family faces. And for Prince William, the realization that his son was suffering silently was a truth that would haunt him forever. Once the monarchy's carefully constructed image, crafted over generations to evoke strength, grace, and unwavering stability, seemed irrelevant. The carefully manicured appearance of royal composure, so meticulously honed by countless centuries of tradition, no longer mattered. What mattered now was not the polished facade of royal duty, but the raw, unvarnished truth. The crisis unfolding was not about ceremonial duties or public relations. It was about something far more intimate and painful. It was about the heartache and suffering of a young child, a boy who had, for much of his short life, been the embodiment of youthful energy and innocence. The world, once captivated by Louis's playful antics and infectious spirit, was now forced to confront the crushing weight of the family's grief. As the news spread across the globe, televisions remained on in homes, their screens flickering with the shocking announcement. Phones buzzed with messages of concern, disbelief, and sorrow. The social media feeds of countless individuals filled with worried posts from even those who had never closely followed royal affairs. Suddenly, the nation's attention was fixed not on the king or the princess, not on the great political figures or the ceremonial duties of the monarchy, but on Louis, the child whose mischievous nature had once brought so much joy to the royal family and the public alike. The laughter that Louis had once stirred up seemed like a distant memory now. In its place was an overwhelming sadness, as the young prince found himself at the center of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The once energetic boy who made headlines with his cheeky expressions and innocent behavior on the palace balcony now stood at the center of a painful crisis that would alter the course of his young life forever. Behind the scenes, the ripples of this revelation were being felt with growing intensity. The walls of Buckingham Palace, once a place of grandeur and untouchable royalty, now seemed to close in on the family as they faced the depth of their personal turmoil. Kensington Palace, the royal residence' known foe, its composed and quiet environment had become the epicenter of urgent, whispered conversations. Representatives were making quiet calls to the staff at Louis's school, instructing them to postpone any planned visits or events, their voices tinged with unease. The royal family was no longer simply battling the complexities of public life and royal obligations. They were fighting to protect their youngest from the emotional storm that had threatened to engulf him. It was no longer just about maintaining appearances or controlling the narrative. It was about safeguarding Louis's fragile heart from the overwhelming emotions that were taking root in the wake of the family's suffering. The pressure, it seemed, had become too much for the young prince, and now the royal family was scrambling to shield him from further harm. It had become painfully clear. The previous year's relentless series of crises had finally caught up with Louis. The weight of the king's health struggles, the ongoing recovery of the Princess of Wales, and the continuous stress of public life had taken a heavy toll on the youngest royal. He had borne more than any child should ever have to. A family that had always prided itself on being able to navigate the toughest of challenges, no matter how difficult, had now found itself exposed, vulnerable. And the world was watching. Prince William, who had long been a symbol of calm leadership and royal duty, now stood before the world not as a figurehead of the monarchy, but as a father who was breaking. In this moment, the weight of his royal responsibilities seemed to crumble away, and the man who had been tasked with carrying the monarchy forward now found himself struggling to carry his own family's grief. With cameras flashing in his face and the eyes of millions focused on him, Prince William made the heartbreaking decision to speak out. There was no podium, no carefully prepared statement, just a father standing before the world raw and exposed. He wasn't playing the part of the heir to the throne in this moment. He was simply a parent desperate to protect his child. His voice, thick with emotion, trembled as he spoke. He paused before he spoke again, as if gathering every ounce of strength within him to form the words that would forever change the way the world saw this family. Finally, he spoke, his voice shaking. Louis has been struggling. In those words, the weight of everything they had endured over the past year seemed to fall upon him. It wasn't just about royal duties or public perception. It was about the heartbreaking truth that a child was suffering, quietly and alone. Louis's struggles weren't something that could be hidden behind the walls of the palace or concealed in a well-crafted statement. This was a personal tragedy, one that was tearing through the family in ways no one had expected. William continued, describing the painful changes that had overtaken their home. The sleepless nights where Louie would come into their bedroom, his small face filled with confusion and fear. The laughter that had once come so easily for the young prince had faded, replaced by sudden mood swings and long silences. The energetic child who once ran through the halls with wild enthusiasm now spent hours locked away in his room, withdrawn and uncertain. His heart, once light and carefree, had been heavy with a sadness he couldn't understand. Louie, who had once been the source of joy in the palace, now found himself caught in the middle of his family's turmoil, a child overwhelmed by the emotional weight of it all. It was clear that the compounded stress of the king's health battles, Catherine's ongoing illness, and the relentless strain of their public lives had pushed Louie to a breaking point. But it was Louie who had carried the heaviest load. Prince William, trying to hold back tears, admitted that he had missed the warning signs. He had been so consumed with managing crises, with fulfilling his royal duties, that he had failed to see the quiet suffering of his son. The guilt weighed heavily on him. "I didn't see what was slipping between my fingers," he said, his voice strained. "I was trying to hold the crown and my family at the same time." The guilt of not being there for his son when he needed him most was a burden that no royal title could alleviate. It was the weight of a father's love and the crushing realization that in trying to protect everything else, he had failed to protect his own child. And as the world watched in shock and sorrow, the royal family found themselves navigating a crisis that went far beyond public appearances. Prince William's plea to the media was not just a call for privacy. It was a father's desperate plea for the space to let his son heal, free from the relentless gaze of the public eye. "He's just a boy," William said, his voice breaking. "Let him rest in peace." It was a simple plea, but it carried with it the weight of a father's heartbreak. Louie, despite his royal status, was still a child, a vulnerable child who needed to be allowed the time to heal, away from the media circus that now surrounded him. Inside the palace, the tension grew ever more palpable. Princess Charlotte, who had always been Louis's quiet protector, was now in need of comfort herself. She had tried in her own way to shield her brother from the sorrow that had overtaken their home, but even Charlotte, wise beyond her years, was beginning to break under the strain. The pressure of being the strong, mature sister, always looking out for her brother, was beginning to take its toll. Her quiet sobs, once unnoticed, were now overheard by her nanny, and in that moment the truth of the family's suffering could no longer be hidden. Catherine, too, was devastated, not by her own illness, but by the realization that her daughter had been quietly shouldering the weight of Louis's pain. The emotional toll of trying to protect Louis, while silently bearing the weight of her own recovery, was too much for Charlotte to carry alone. The family's silent grief had now become too loud to ignore. As Louis continued to retreat further into himself, his once vibrant spirit slowly faded. The boy who had once brought laughter into the hearts of his family now found himself alone in the silence of his room. His energy had been drained by confusion and fear, emotions he could neither express nor understand. The royal family, who had always presented a flawless image of grace and strength, was now confronted with the painful truth that their youngest son was quietly breaking. The boy who had once been the heart and soul of their family now seemed lost to them. Despite her own battle to recover, Catherine could not ignore the signs of Louis's pain. The family had tried everything they could to maintain a sense of normalcy, to shield their children from the chaos of the outside world, but they had failed to see the quiet suffering that had been festering in Louis's heart. The suggestion of therapy, though made with good intentions, was met with resistance. The fear of exposing Louis's emotional pain to the world, of having it splashed across the tabloids, was too much for the family to bear. The thought of their child's turmoil becoming public fodder was a reality they couldn't face. The truth was undeniable. The royal family's carefully curated public image was at odds with the harsh reality behind the palace walls. In their attempt to protect their children from the harsh scrutiny of the world, they had overlooked the silent wounds of their youngest son. The royal family had spent so much time shielding their children from the world that they had failed to see the emotional battle raging inside Louis. And now, as the world watched in horror, they were left to pick up the pieces of a broken heart they had tried so desperately to protect. A final decision had been made, one that would mark a turning point in the life of Prince Louis and the royal family. Prince Louis would no longer attend school at Monarchy. The royal family, who had fought so valiantly to maintain a semblance of normalcy in their lives despite the overwhelming challenges, was now faced with making the most difficult and extreme decision they had yet encountered. This wasn't simply a routine choice to switch schools or adjust schedules. It was a heart-wrenching cry for help, a desperate acknowledgement that their youngest son's emotional well-being could no longer be overlooked or swept aside. The mounting pressure of family crises, compounded by Louis's internal struggles, had finally reached a breaking point. Inside sources revealed the catalyst for this seismic shift. A seemingly innocent question from one of Louis's classmates, a question that in its simplicity shattered the delicate emotional state Louis had been trying so hard to manage. "Is your mom still sick?" the young classmate had asked, an innocent inquiry made without malice, yet it pierced Louis's fragile heart in a way that no one could have predicted. The question, a symbol of the uncertainty and pain that Louis had been grappling with, was loaded with the fear and confusion that had been quietly growing inside him for months. It was a stark reminder of the tumultuous events surrounding his family, a reminder that his childhood had been irrevocably altered. In that moment, Louis's emotional defenses cracked, and the young prince, who had once been full of laughter and vitality, withdrew completely. The spark in his eyes faded as he shut down entirely, unable to process the whirlwind of feelings that had overtaken him. From that moment onward, everything changed. Louis refused to eat, his small body retreating even further into a silent shell. His once energetic spirit seemed extinguished, and the brightness that had once defined him was now replaced with a palpable heaviness. He refused to speak, and when morning arrived, he refused to return to school, the royal family's worst. Ears had been realized. The young prince was no longer the same child they had known. They had tried everything to protect him, to shield him from the pain that had been seeping into his life, but all their efforts had been in vain. Their worst nightmare had come to life. Their son, once so full of life and energy, was now drowning in his emotional turmoil, unable to cope with the weight of it all. The royal family had done everything they could to maintain a sense of stability and order for their children, to ensure they could continue their lives as normally as possible despite the challenges they faced. But this was no longer about public appearances or the kingdom's expectations. This was about Louis, their son, who was in emotional crisis, and it had become painfully clear that no amount of royal strength or public composure could protect him from the quiet devastation taking place within him. The gravity of the situation settled over the family like a heavy fog. The decision to withdraw Louis from school wasn't just about changing environments. It was an acknowledgement that Louis's emotional state had become too fragile to continue with life as it had been. His emotional well-being had to be their priority now. The fear of what Louis was enduring was overwhelming, and no royal title or external duty could protect him from the pain that had gripped him so deeply. It was a heartbreaking moment for Prince William and Catherine, who had always been dedicated to providing their children with a sense of security and normalcy. But in this moment, they realized that they had to put everything else aside to focus on their son. The royal family's private crisis had now been laid bare to the world, and the magnitude of Louis's emotional struggle was undeniable. No longer could they hide behind their titles or their royal duties. They were simply parents in pain, trying to protect and heal their child from a storm that had quietly ravaged his heart.